Leo, a carpenter whose hands were more familiar with the grit of sandpaper than the softness of a full wallet, made the decision on a cold November Tuesday, a decision that would ripple out from his small, quiet life and crash upon the shores of a world he couldn't imagine. He chose to open his home and his already strained heart to a second child, a quiet, haunted boy named Sam who was adrift in the sterile sea of the foster care system. Leo did this not for recognition or reward, but because his own son, Finn, deserved a brother, and because Leo believed with a fierce, unwavering certainty that no child should have to face the world alone. He was a man of modest means but immeasurable integrity, unaware that this single act of profound, instinctual kindness was the unwitting answer to a silent prayer, a prayer whispered for years within the cold, marble halls of a mansion owned by the reclusive and grief-stricken millionaire, Arthur Sterling, a man who believed everything he had ever truly loved was gone forever. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The world for Leo was a kaleidoscope of simple, repeating patterns, a life etched in the grain of wood and the scent of varnish that clung to his clothes like a second skin. His apartment, nestled on the third floor of a tired brick building, was small, almost claustrophobically so, but it was meticulously clean, a sanctuary against the city's grime. Sunlight struggled through the tall, narrow windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent ballerinas, and falling upon surfaces that were worn but loved. The sofa had a permanent dip on the left cushion where Leo sat every evening, and the small wooden table in the kitchen nook bore the faint scars and rings of countless family meals, a testament to a life lived within its four walls. His existence was a quiet battle fought on multiple fronts, a daily confrontation with a stack of bills that seemed to grow of its own accord, and the ghost of a laugh that no longer echoed in the hallway. His wife, Elena, had been the vibrant color in their small world, and her absence had left behind a silence that Leo worked tirelessly to fill with the sounds of a normal life for his son, Finn. He was a man defined by his resilience, a quiet dignity that was as much a part of him as the calluses on his palms. Each morning he would rise before the sun, his movements economical and purposeful, preparing breakfast for Finn, packing his lunch with a small, hand-drawn picture on the napkin, a little burst of color in an otherwise grayscale day. His workshop in the corner of the living room was his haven, where slabs of anonymous pine and oak were transformed under his patient hands into objects of simple beauty, chairs that promised comfort, and tables that promised gatherings. Yet the orders were infrequent, the pay meager, a constant, nagging worry that gnawed at the edges of his peace. There were days when the temptation to surrender felt like a physical weight on his shoulders, to accept the world's harsh judgment that he was not enough, that he could not provide. But then he would look at Finn, his bright, curious eyes so much like his mother's, and the resolve would harden in his chest once more. His love for his son was the anchor that held him steady in the storm of his circumstances, the unwavering core of his identity. It was this profound, deeply ingrained sense of fatherhood that led him down the path to adoption, a path that seemed both illogical and inevitable. The world saw a struggling single father, barely making ends meet, and questioned the wisdom of bringing another child into such a precarious existence. The social worker, a woman with kind but weary eyes, had laid out the challenges in stark, unsparing detail. She spoke of financial burdens, of emotional capacity, of the sheer, overwhelming reality of raising two children alone in a world that offered little support. Leo listened patiently, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze steady. He did not offer grand promises or eloquent speeches. His argument was simple, born from the very essence of his being. He spoke of brotherhood, of the quiet, unspoken bond that could be a lifeline in the tumultuous sea of life. "A brother," he had said, his voice soft but firm, "is a promise that you are not alone." He believed it with a conviction that left little room for doubt. He wasn't just offering a roof over a child's head, he was offering a piece of his own heart, a place in his small, fragile family. He was offering Finn a brother, and a brother, a true brother, was a gift beyond any monetary value. The social worker, who had heard countless stories of hardship and hope, saw in Leo's quiet determination a strength that was rarer and more valuable than any bank statement. She saw the integrity in his worn-out work boots and the love in his tired eyes, and she agreed to the placement. A small leap of faith in a world that was often short on it. That was how he met Sam. The first meeting took place in a small, sterile room at the orphanage, a room painted in a pale, forgettable yellow that did nothing to warm the chill in the air. Sam was a small, fragile-looking boy of 6, a year younger than Finn, with large, dark eyes that seemed to hold the shadows of a past he couldn't articulate. He was silent, withdrawn, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. He clutched a small, battered toy car in his hand, a little red convertible with a chipped fender and one wobbly wheel. It was a talisman, a tangible piece of a life that had been shattered, the only object he had brought with him into the system. Finn, usually boisterous and full of questions, was uncharacteristically quiet, sensing the fragility of the moment. He stood close to his father, his hand tucked into Leo's. Leo knelt down, not crowding the boy, but simply bringing himself to his level. He didn't speak at first, allowing the silence to be a space of safety rather than a void of expectation. Then, in a moment of pure, unscripted childhood empathy, Finn stepped forward. He held out his own favorite toy, a small, brightly painted wooden bird that Leo had carved for him. He didn't say a word, just offered it. Sam looked from the bird to Finn's outstretched hand, his gaze flickering with a spark of curiosity, the first light they had seen in his eyes. He didn't take the bird, but he loosened his grip, just slightly, on his own battered car. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible shift, but for Leo, it was everything. It was the beginning of a bridge, the first tentative step across the chasm of loneliness that separated two little boys who had both lost too much. It was in that quiet, sun-drenched, sterile room that a family began to knit itself together, thread by fragile thread, an act of quiet defiance against the cold arithmetic of loss, a silent promise whispered between two children and a man who believed in the enduring, redemptive power of love. The drive home was a study in quiet contrasts, the rhythmic hum of the old truck, a soothing soundtrack to the unspoken emotions that filled the small cab. Finn chattered excitedly, pointing out landmarks and asking a stream of endless questions, a nervous energy that was his way of papering over the enormity of the moment. Sam, buckled in between them, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the worn red toy car in his lap, his knuckles white from the pressure of his grip. He was a small island of stillness in the motion of their world. When they finally arrived, climbing the 3 flights of stairs to the apartment, Leo felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. He saw his home through a stranger's eyes, through Sam's eyes. He saw the faded paint on the walls, the worn patch on the rug by the door, the sheer, undeniable lack of material wealth. For a fleeting moment, doubt, cold and sharp, pierced his resolve. What had he done? Was this small, struggling space enough to heal a child's broken world? But then Finn, with the effortless grace of a child, took Sam's hand. "This is our room," he announced, his voice filled with pride, leading him towards the small bedroom they would now share. Leo had spent weeks preparing it. He had built a sturdy bunk bed from reclaimed pine, the wood sanded smooth and smelling faintly of the forest. He had painted the walls a cheerful, sunny yellow, a stark contrast to the institutional pallor of the orphanage. 2 small chests of drawers stood side by side, one for each boy, and on the wall, Leo had hung a hand-carved mobile of planets and stars, each one painted with meticulous care. It was a space built not with money, but with love, with hours of labor stolen from the night, with the deep, abiding hope for a new beginning. Sam stood in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the light from the living room, and for the first time, he looked up, his gaze tracing the slow, gentle rotation of the wooden planets. A sound, small and almost inaudible, escaped his lips, a soft intake of breath, a tiny spark of wonder in the vast darkness of his silence. In the days that followed, Sam remained a ghost in their home, a silent observer moving through the spaces of their lives with a heartbreaking caution. He ate what was put before him without complaint, his eyes downcast. He played by himself in a corner of the room, the red car, his constant companion, tracing imaginary roads on the wooden floor. He did not cry, he did not laugh, he did not rage, His emotions were locked away in a vault to which no one, not even he, seemed to have the key. Leo's heart ached for him. He approached the boy's silence not as a problem to be solved, but as a language to be learned. He did not push or pry. Instead, he spoke to him in the language he knew best, the language of quiet, consistent care. He would sit on the floor near Sam, not talking, just being present, sanding a piece of wood, the rhythmic scrape, and pull a comforting, steady sound in the quiet room. He would point out the different types of wood, the tight grain of the oak, the soft pliability of the pine, explaining the process in a low, calm monologue that asked for no response. He was laying a foundation of trust, one small, patient gesture at a time. Finn, in his own way, did the same. He would leave his favorite toys near Sam, an unspoken invitation. He would narrate his own games, his voice filling the room with stories of valiant knights and roaring dragons, creating a world of adventure that Sam could enter if he chose. It was a slow, delicate dance of advance and retreat, a testament to the innate human capacity for empathy. The breakthrough, when it came, was as small and as momentous as a single raindrop in a drought. It was a Tuesday evening, a week after Sam had arrived. A sudden, violent thunderstorm had descended upon the city, the sky ripped open by flashes of lightning, the windows rattling with the force of the thunder. Leo was in the kitchen, washing the dishes, while Finn was drawing at the table. With a particularly loud clap of thunder, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into a sudden, disorienting darkness. A small, terrified whimper came from the living room. It was the first sound of distress Sam had made. In an instant, Leo was by his side, a flashlight in his hand. He found Sam huddled in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest, his body trembling, the red car fallen from his grasp. Leo didn't say, "Don't be scared." He sat on the floor, pulling the trembling boy into his arms, wrapping him in a hug that was both firm and gentle. "It's loud, isn't it?" Leo whispered, his own voice a calm anchor in the storm. "It's just the sky making a lot of noise. We're safe in here." He held him for a long time, rocking him gently as the storm raged outside, his hand stroking the boy's hair. Finn came over, shining his own small flashlight onto the ceiling, making the beam dance like a captured star. And then, something shifted. Sam's trembling began to subside, and he leaned his head against Leo's chest. His small hand reached out, not for his car, but for Leo's shirt, his fingers clutching the worn fabric. A single, hot tear soaked through the thin cotton, a silent, profound release. He looked up at Leo, his dark eyes shimmering in the flashlight's glow, and he spoke his first word since arriving. "Daddy?" It was a question, tentative and fragile, a word he hadn't used in a lifetime. Leo's heart felt as though it might break, not from sorrow, but from an overwhelming wave of love. He tightened his embrace, his own eyes blurring with tears. "Yes," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm right here." In the flickering darkness of their small apartment, surrounded by the fury of the storm, a family was truly born. Its foundation sealed not by paperwork or legal decrees, but by a single word, a single tear, a single, desperate reach for comfort in the dark. It was the beginning of a healing that would, in time, prove powerful enough to mend not just one broken child, but two broken worlds. Across the city, in a world so vastly different from Leo's that it might as well have been another planet, Arthur Sterling existed in a state of suspended animation. His home was not a home, it was a museum, a monument to a life that had ended abruptly 7 years ago. The mansion, a sprawling edifice of cold stone and glass, sat on a manicured estate, insulated from the noise and chaos of the city by a high, wrought-iron fence and a legion of silent, watchful security guards. Inside, the silence was even more profound. It was a weighted, oppressive silence, absorbed by priceless Persian rugs and thick velvet curtains that were perpetually drawn against the sun. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint, antiseptic scent of lemon polish and the fainter, ghostlier scent of a perfume that hadn't been worn in years. Arthur's life was a meticulously curated display of immense wealth and profound emptiness. He was the sole architect of a global financial empire, a name that commanded respect and fear in boardrooms around the world. His days were a rigid procession of meetings, conference calls, and strategic decisions that moved markets and shaped economies. He navigated this world with a cold, detached precision, a master puppeteer pulling strings from the sterile confines of his high-tech home office. But the power and the money were a hollow distraction, a complex, intricate game he played to keep the memories at bay. They brought him no joy, no satisfaction, only the dull, metallic taste of a victory that meant nothing. The man who had once been known for his hearty laugh and his generous spirit had been hollowed out by grief, leaving behind a brittle, cynical shell. The tragedy had been swift and merciless, a fiery car crash on a rain-slicked highway that had stolen his wife, Amelia, and one of his two beloved sons, 5-year-old William. In the chaotic aftermath, his other son, 4-year-old Thomas, had vanished. The police had searched for weeks, a frantic, desperate hunt that had yielded nothing. There were no witnesses, no clues, just the horrifying, gaping void of his absence. He was presumed to have wandered off from the scene in a state of shock, to have succumbed to the elements or to some other unspeakable fate. His body was never found, a final, cruel twist of the knife that denied Arthur the closure of a burial. The unresolved loss was a cancer in his soul, eating away at him from the inside. He was a man haunted by a ghost and a question, a life sentence of what if. His world was populated by employees, not friends. He kept everyone at a distance, his interactions brief and transactional. The loneliness was a physical presence in the vast, empty rooms of his mansion. He ate his meals alone at a long, polished mahogany table that could seat 20, served by a housekeeper who moved with the silent efficiency of a phantom, her eyes always averted. He would sometimes catch his reflection in the dark, gleaming surface of the table and see a stranger staring back, a man with haunted eyes and a face etched with a sorrow so deep it had become a part of his bone structure. His only connection to his past, to the man he used to be, was a single, cherished photograph. It was a large, framed portrait that hung above the cold marble fireplace in the grand drawing room. It was from a happier time, a sun-drenched afternoon in a field of wildflowers. In it, Amelia was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair a halo of gold in the sunlight. On her right was William, a sturdy, confident boy with a mischievous grin. And on her left was little Thomas, a more serious, watchful child, clutching a small, bright red toy convertible, his most treasured possession. Arthur would stand before this portrait for hours, the only place in the house where he allowed himself to feel the full, crushing weight of his loss. He would trace the faint outline of his wife's smile, whisper his sons' names into the silent air, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He was a king in a castle of sorrow, a man who had everything and nothing. Yet, once a year, on the anniversary of the accident, Arthur Sterling would perform a secret ritual, a private pilgrimage of penance and searching. He would shed the trappings of his wealth, like a snake shedding its skin. The bespoke suits and silk ties were replaced with worn jeans, frayed woolen sweater, and a simple, unassuming coat. He would leave his fortress of solitude and walk among the ordinary people of the city, his face obscured by a woolen cap. He became anonymous, invisible, just another face in the crowd. It was a form of self-flagellation, a way to immerse himself in the world he had lost, the world of simple human connection and interaction. But it was also a test. He would wander the streets, his expression downcast, his posture slumped, projecting an aura of vulnerability and need. He was testing the world, testing humanity. He was secretly, desperately searching for a sign, a flicker of the kindness and compassion that he believed had died with his family. Year after year, the world failed his test. People would pass him by, their faces closed, their gazes averted, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice the quiet sorrow of a stranger. He would see only indifference, selfishness, a world that confirmed his most cynical beliefs. The ritual always ended the same way, with Arthur returning to his cold, empty mansion, the armor of his bitterness reinforced, his heart a little heavier, his hope a little dimmer. He was searching for a miracle in a world he no longer believed in, a jaded, powerful man who was secretly, profoundly vulnerable, waiting for a single, selfless act to shatter his gilded cage and prove that a genuine human connection was still possible, a redemption he craved but no longer dared to hope for. The bond between Finn and Sam grew with the slow, steady persistence of a vine seeking sunlight. It was a brotherhood forged not in shared blood, but in shared spaces, in the quiet language of childhood. Finn, with his open, generous heart, became Sam's guide, his protector, his narrator for a world that was still new and frightening. He taught Sam the unspoken rules of their small apartment, which creaky floorboard to avoid, the best spot to catch the morning sun, how to coax the fussy old television into life. Sam, in turn, began to emerge from his shell, his silence slowly giving way to hesitant words, then phrases, then the full, tumbling cascade of a child's chatter. He began to mirror Finn's easy laughter, a sound that started as a small, breathy puff and blossomed into a genuine, full-throated expression of joy. Leo watched this unfolding miracle with a heart that was full to bursting. The financial strain was still a constant, oppressive weight, a wolf always at the door, but the sound of his two sons playing, the sight of them huddled together over a book, their heads bent in shared concentration, was a form of wealth that no bank could measure. He worked longer hours, his hands raw and aching, taking on any repair job he could find, no matter how small. He patched leaky roofs, fixed broken chairs, and mended fences, his body weary but his spirit buoyed by the family he was fighting for. The worn red toy car remained Sam's most prized possession, but it was no longer a shield against the world. It became a character in their shared games, the intrepid hero in the grand adventures they concocted on the living room floor. It raced against Finn's wooden animals, it flew through the cosmos of the hand-carved mobile. It became a bridge between Sam's fractured past and his healing present. It was a symbol of his survival, a link to a memory that was still shrouded in fog, a memory he couldn't quite grasp but couldn't let go of. He would sometimes fall silent in the middle of a game, his small fingers tracing the chipped fender of the car, a flicker of confusion and sorrow in his eyes, a momentary cloud passing over the bright sun of his new life. Finn would sense these moments, these echoes of a past trauma, and with an empathy far beyond his years, he would gently change the course of the game, creating a new adventure to draw Sam back into the safety of the now. He was not just a brother, he was a gentle, intuitive healer, mending the broken pieces of Sam's heart with the simple, powerful glue of acceptance and love. Leo knew he was witnessing something sacred, the profound, redemptive power of a true, human connection. He saw how Finn's stability anchored Sam's fear, and how Sam's quiet resilience taught Finn a deeper form of compassion. They were two halves of a whole, each making the other stronger, better. One evening, as Leo was tucking them into their bunk bed, Finn on the bottom and Sam on the top, Finn looked up at him, his expression serious. "Dad," he said, his voice a low whisper, "I'm glad Sam is my brother, my real brother." Leo's breath caught in his throat. He looked from Finn's earnest face to Sam, who was peering down from the top bunk, his dark eyes wide. Leo reached up and gently ruffled Sam's hair, then leaned down and kissed Finn on the forehead. "He is your real brother, Finn," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. "Blood doesn't make a family. Love does." In that moment, the small, cramped bedroom felt like the grandest cathedral in the world, a holy place consecrated by the simple, powerful truth of their bond. The apartment was no longer just a place where they lived. It was a home, its walls saturated with the quiet, everyday moments that constitute a life. Its foundations built on the unshakable bedrock of a father's love, and the fierce, protective loyalty of two little boys who had found in each other the irreplaceable gift of a brother. It was a fortress of love, small and unassuming, but strong enough to withstand any storm the world might throw at it, a beacon of warmth and hope in a city that was often cold and indifferent. This fortress, built by the hands of a humble carpenter, was unknowingly preparing to receive a visitor from a world of unimaginable wealth and unbearable sorrow, a visitor whose life was about to be irrevocably changed by the simple, powerful truth that was housed within its walls. The 7th anniversary of the tragedy dawned cold and gray, the sky the color of old pewter, a perfect reflection of Arthur Sterling's soul. The date was seared into his memory, a permanent scar on the calendar of his life. He went through the motions of his morning routine with the numb precision of an automaton. The shower was scalding hot, a futile attempt to feel something, anything, other than the familiar icy grip of grief. He bypassed the walk-in closet filled with bespoke suits and instead pulled on the clothes of his alter ego, the uniform of his annual pilgrimage. The jeans were faded, the sweater was frayed at the cuffs, the coat was thin and offered little protection against the biting November wind. They were the clothes of a man who had nothing, a fitting costume for a man who felt he had lost everything that mattered. He slipped out of the mansion through a side door, foregoing the chauffeured limousine for the anonymity of the city bus. The journey downtown was a descent into a world he observed but never touched. He saw the tired faces of commuters, the forced brightness of advertisements, the relentless, churning energy of a city that had long since forgotten his private sorrow. He was a ghost at the feast, a silent, unseen observer of a life that went on without him, without them. He got off the bus in a part of the city he rarely visited, a neighborhood of brick tenements and small, struggling shops, a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers of his financial district. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and roasting chestnuts from a street vendor's cart. The wind was relentless, funneling through the narrow streets, whipping scraps of paper into a frantic dance. Arthur hunched his shoulders, pulling the thin coat tighter around him, the physical cold a welcome distraction from the coldness within. He began to walk, his pace aimless, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement. This was the ritual: to walk until exhaustion silenced the voices in his head, to immerse himself in the gritty reality of the world, to perform his secret, desperate test. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own making, a lonely island of grief surrounded by the indifferent currents of humanity. He passed by hundreds of people, a river of faces that flowed around him, their expressions ranging from harried to bored to blank. No one met his eye. No one saw the billionaire playing a pauper. They saw only what he projected, a man of no consequence, a man who was invisible. The cynicism in his heart hardened with each passing block. This was the world, he thought, a cold, transactional place where kindness was a currency too rare to be spent on strangers. He was a fool to keep searching for something that didn't exist. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness, a physical manifestation of his emotional exhaustion. He stumbled, his hand reaching out to brace himself against the cold, brick wall of a building. He leaned there for a moment, his head bowed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The city continued to swirl around him, a blur of motion and noise, oblivious to the man who was quietly coming apart. He looked up, his gaze unfocused, and saw them, a man and two small boys, walking towards him. They were a small island of warmth in the cold, gray day. The man was holding the hands of both children, his shoulders squared against the wind, a quiet, protective presence. The boys, bundled in colorful hats and scarves, were looking up at him, their faces full of trust. They were a portrait of a family, a snapshot of the life he had lost, and the sight of them was a fresh, sharp stab of pain in his already wounded heart. He wanted to look away, to retreat back into the safety of his own misery, but he couldn't. There was something about the man's gentle demeanor, the easy affection between him and the children, that held him captive. He watched them as they drew closer, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring within him, a feeling he couldn't name, a dangerous, fragile flicker of something that felt perilously close to hope. He didn't know it then, but his annual, cynical test of the world was about to be administered by a humble carpenter and two little boys, and the results would shatter the foundations of his carefully constructed reality. The encounter, when it happened, was as simple and as profound as an answered prayer. As Leo, Finn, and Sam drew level with the spot where Arthur was leaning against the wall, a sudden, violent gust of wind tore through the street, ripping a sheaf of papers from a woman's grasp and sending them fluttering into the air like a flock of startled birds. In the ensuing chaos, a man rushing past bumped hard into Arthur, sending him stumbling forward, his already precarious balance lost. He fell to one knee, a sharp pain shooting through his leg, the impact jarring him to the bone. He stayed there for a moment, the cold, damp pavement seeping through his worn trousers, a profound sense of humiliation washing over him. The people on the street, the man who had knocked him down, the woman chasing her papers, they all just flowed around him, their gazes sliding past him as if he were a piece of street debris, an inconvenient obstacle in their path. The world was confirming his darkest beliefs, delivering the verdict he had come to expect. He was invisible. He was nothing. But then, a voice cut through the noise, calm and concerned. "Are you all right, sir?" Arthur looked up from his position on the ground and saw the man with the two children standing before him, his face etched with genuine worry. It was Leo. He had let go of the boy's hands and was extending his own, a work-roughened hand that was steady and strong. Arthur just stared at it for a moment, stunned into silence. Kindness, when you have not experienced it for a long time, can feel like a shock to the system. "Here," Leo said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let me help you." He grasped Arthur's arm and helped him to his feet, his grip surprisingly powerful. That was a nasty fall. Arthur brushed himself off, muttering a thank you, his voice hoarse. He was acutely aware of the two small boys standing behind Leo, watching him with wide, curious eyes. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way his wealth and power never allowed. "You're shivering," Leo observed, his gaze taking in Arthur's thin coat, a garment wholly inadequate for the biting wind. Without a moment's hesitation, Leo began to shrug off his own jacket, a thick, quilted work coat that was frayed at the edges but looked warm and substantial. "No, please," Arthur protested, his voice stronger now, the ingrained reflex of refusing help kicking in. "You don't have to do that. I'm fine." "Nonsense," Leo said, dismissing his protest with a simple shake of his head. "You're freezing. Your lips are blue. Here, take it. We're only a block from home. You need it more than I do." He held the jacket out, an offering that was so simple, so unhesitating, that it disarmed all of Arthur's defenses. It was an act of pure, unadulterated altruism, a gesture from a man who clearly had little to spare, offered to a stranger he believed had even less. While Arthur stood there, grappling with this unexpected assault of kindness, the smaller of the two boys, Sam, stepped forward. He was clutching his worn red toy car. He looked from Arthur's shivering frame to his own father's concerned face, and then he did something that would forever alter the course of Arthur's life. He held out the toy car, his small hand trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the gravity of the offering. "For you?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "So you're not sad?" Arthur froze. He looked down at the small, battered toy, the chipped red paint, the wobbly wheel. And then he looked into the boy's eyes, large and dark and serious, and in their depths he saw not pity, but empathy. The boy was not just offering a toy, he was offering a piece of himself, a comfort object, a talisman against the sadness he recognized in a stranger's face. The gesture, so innocent and so profound, pierced through the thick, cynical armor Arthur had built around his heart. It struck a chord deep within him, a note that hadn't been played in 7 years. He was speechless. He couldn't accept it, this precious offering from a child who had nothing. He shook his head, a lump forming in his throat. Leo placed a gentle hand on Sam's shoulder. "That's very kind of you, Sam," he said softly, his voice full of pride. Then he looked at Arthur, his gaze full of a simple, profound wisdom. "We all have to look out for each other," he said, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. He draped his own jacket over Arthur's shoulders, the fabric still warm from his own body, smelling faintly of sawdust and clean laundry. The warmth was immediate, seeping into Arthur's chilled bones, but it was the warmth of the gesture that thawed something deeper, something that had been frozen for 7 long years. I can't," Arthur stammered, overwhelmed. "You have children to keep warm." "And they have me," Leo replied with a small smile. "We'll be fine. You get yourself somewhere warm, sir. Get a hot drink." And with that, he took his son's hands again, gave Arthur a final, concerned nod, and walked away. A man in a thin shirt leading his 2 small, bundled boys down the cold city street, leaving behind a billionaire dressed in a borrowed coat, clutching a borrowed warmth, his carefully ordered world thrown into absolute, terrifying, beautiful chaos. Arthur stood on the street corner for a long time after they had gone, a statue of stunned disbelief. The weight of Leo's jacket on his shoulders felt heavier than any corporate responsibility he had ever shouldered. It was a weight of pure, unalloyed humanity, and it was crushing him. The wind still howled, but he barely felt it. The warmth of the coat was a shield, not just against the cold, but against the cynicism that had been his constant companion for so long. He looked down at his hand, half expecting to see the red toy car, but the boy had taken it back at his father's gentle prompting. The image of the offering, however, was burned into his mind. "So, you're not sad?" The boy had seen him. Not the billionaire, not the recluse, not the powerful magnate. He had seen the sadness, the one true thing about him, and he had responded with the purest form of compassion. Arthur finally began to walk, his steps unsteady, his mind reeling. He didn't walk back towards the bus stop. He walked in the direction Leo and his sons had gone, a subconscious pull he didn't understand. He felt a desperate, urgent need to know more about the man who would give the coat off his back to a stranger, about the small boy who would offer his only treasure to soothe a stranger's sorrow. This was not the world he knew. This was not the humanity he had written off as selfish and indifferent. This was something else entirely, something that challenged the very foundations of his grief-stricken existence. He reached his own street, the street of imposing mansions and silent, manicured lawns, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. He was wearing another man's worn-out coat, a garment that radiated a simple, honest warmth that his own vast, cold house could never replicate. He walked through his front door, and the silence that greeted him was no longer just empty. It was accusing. The housekeeper appeared, her eyes widening in surprise at his disheveled appearance and the strange coat. But she said nothing, her training in discretion absolute. Arthur walked past her, past the priceless art and the polished antiques, and went straight to the drawing room. He stood before the portrait of his smiling, laughing family. He looked at the face of his lost son, Thomas, at the small, serious boy clutching his own toy car, a car so similar to the one the little boy on the street had offered him. A strange, unsettling feeling began to creep over him, a sense of familiarity he couldn't place. He tried to dismiss it as a trick of his grief-addled mind, a desperate heart seeing patterns where there were none. The boy on the street was just a kind child. The car was just a coincidence. But the feeling lingered, a persistent, nagging question mark at the edge of his thoughts. He took off Leo's jacket and laid it carefully over the back of a silk-upholstered armchair, an object of simple, working-class utility in a room dedicated to opulent display. It looked completely out of place, and yet, at that moment, it felt like the most valuable object in the entire mansion. For the first time in 7 years, Arthur Sterling did not feel numb. He felt a tumultuous, terrifying mix of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a fragile, unfamiliar flicker of hope. The world had not failed his test. On the contrary, it had delivered an answer so profound, so utterly unexpected, that it had shattered his cynicism and left him exposed and trembling. He knew, with a certainty that was both frightening and exhilarating, that he could not let this go. He could not simply return the jacket and retreat back into his gilded cage. The encounter on the street had not been an ending. It was a beginning. It was a thread, and he had to follow it, no matter where it led. He went to his office, sat behind his vast, empty desk, and picked up the phone. He called the head of his personal security team, a man named Thompson, a former intelligence officer who was ruthlessly efficient and discreet. "Thompson," Arthur said, his voice quiet but firm, "I have a task for you, an unusual one. I need you to find someone." He described the man, the 2 boys, the approximate location of the encounter. He described the act of kindness, the offering of the jacket. He left out the part about the toy car, feeling it was too personal, too strange to articulate. "I want to know everything about him," Arthur commanded. "His name, his circumstances, everything. But you are to be discreet, utterly discreet. He must not know he is being watched. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, sir," Thompson replied, his voice betraying no surprise. Arthur hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, the leather sighing under his weight. He looked out the window at the gray, unforgiving sky. He had set in motion a course of events whose outcome he could not predict. He was stepping out of the shadows of his past, drawn forward by the memory of a simple act of kindness, a humble carpenter's coat, and the haunting, hopeful eyes of a little boy who had seen his sorrow and offered him a gift beyond price. The search had begun, not just for a kind stranger, but for the man Arthur Sterling himself had once been. Thompson was, as always, ruthlessly efficient. In the age of ubiquitous surveillance and digital footprints, finding one man in a city of millions, even with a vague description, was a challenge, but not an insurmountable one for a man with his resources. He cross-referenced security footage from street cameras, traffic cameras, and the exterior cameras of local businesses. It took 2 days of meticulous, painstaking work, of fast-forwarding through endless hours of grainy footage, but he found them. The camera on a corner deli had captured the moment perfectly. The stumble, the fall, the small crowd parting, and then the singular act of kindness. The footage showed Leo taking off his jacket, draping it over the shoulders of the man who was, unbeknownst to him, one of the wealthiest people on the planet. The camera even caught the small, poignant gesture of the child offering his toy. Thompson zoomed in, enhancing the image, capturing the man's face, the faces of his sons. From there, it was a simple matter of running facial recognition software, cross-referencing public records, and piecing together the narrative of a life. The report that landed on Arthur's desk 48 hours after his request was concise and comprehensive. It contained a name, Leo Vance, a profession, carpenter, self-employed, a family status, widower, single father to one biological son, Finn Vance, age 7, and a recent significant life event, finalized adoption of a second son, Samuel Vance, age 6, just 3 weeks prior. The report detailed Leo's financial struggles, the modest but clean apartment building, the lack of any criminal record, the glowing, albeit brief, character references in the adoption file. It was a portrait of a man of quiet integrity, a man struggling against the odds to keep his family together, a man who, despite his own profound lack, had not hesitated to give to someone he perceived as having less. Arthur read the report several times, each word sinking in, each fact adding another layer to the complex emotions swirling within him. The adoption. The man was so burdened, so close to the edge, and yet he had opened his home and his heart to another child. It was an act of such radical compassion that Arthur could barely comprehend it. He looked again at the grainy surveillance photo of Sam, the small, serious boy looking up at him with those wide, dark eyes. A flicker of that same unsettling familiarity returned, a ghost of a memory he couldn't quite catch. He told himself it was just the context, the story of this child's difficult past resonating with his own. He knew he had to return the jacket. It was the perfect pretense, a natural, logical reason to seek Leo out. But the thought of simply handing it back, saying thank you, and walking away felt impossible, inadequate. That single act of kindness deserved more than a simple thank you. It demanded a response, a rebalancing of the scales. He wanted to help, to alleviate the man's struggles, to pour some of his meaningless, abundant wealth into this small, deserving life. But how? A direct offer of money would be crude, insulting. It would turn a beautiful, selfless act into a transaction, cheapening the very thing he had found so profound. He had to be delicate, to approach this with a finesse he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He decided against sending an employee. This was something he had to do himself. He had to see them again, to stand in the presence of that quiet dignity one more time. He planned his approach carefully. He wouldn't go as Arthur Sterling, the billionaire. That name was a barrier, a wall of power and expectation. He would go as the man they had met on the street, the grateful stranger. He drove himself, taking a simple, unremarkable sedan from his vast collection of cars. He wore the same unassuming clothes, but this time he carried the freshly dry-cleaned work coat, folded neatly over his arm. As he drove towards Leo's neighborhood, his heart hammered against his ribs. He felt more nervous than he had before any multi-billion-dollar negotiation. This felt more important. This felt real. He parked a block away from the apartment building, the reality of Leo's circumstances hitting him with fresh force. The building was old, the brickwork crumbling in places, the fire escape streaked with rust. It was a world of making do, of getting by, a universe away from his own life of effortless abundance. He walked to the entrance, the name Vance listed next to apartment 3B on the tarnished brass directory. He pressed the button, and a moment later, a voice crackled through the intercom, young and bright. "Hello? It's Finn!" Leo's voice called out from the background. "Who is it, buddy?" "I don't know," the boy's voice replied. Arthur leaned towards the small grill. "Hello," he said, his own voice sounding strained to his ears. "My name is Arthur. Your father helped me the other day. I've come to return his jacket." There was a pause, and then the buzzer sounded, a harsh grating noise that unlocked the door. He stepped inside, into a narrow, dimly lit hallway that smelled of dust and boiled cabbage. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet building. The door to apartment 3B was open, and Leo was standing there, a look of surprised recognition on his face. Behind him, Finn and Sam peered out, their eyes wide with curiosity. "I remember you," Leo said, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Please, come in. I'm glad to see you're looking better." The warmth of the welcome was so genuine, so immediate, that it took Arthur by surprise. He stepped inside, and was immediately enveloped by the atmosphere of the small apartment. It was cramped and filled with worn furniture, but it was immaculately clean and radiated a palpable sense of love and safety. The air smelled of freshly baked cookies and sawdust. Arthur felt as though he had stepped across a threshold into another world, a world where value was measured in warmth and care, not dollars and cents. "I wanted to thank you," Arthur said, holding out the folded jacket. "You didn't have to do that." It was incredibly kind. Leo took the jacket, his calloused fingers brushing against Arthur's. "Anyone would have done the same," he said with a shrug, though they both knew that wasn't true. It was nothing. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. And as Arthur stood in that small, love-filled apartment, looking at the man who had saved him in more ways than he could ever know, he realized that simply returning the jacket would never be enough. He was here for a reason, and he couldn't leave until he had found a way to repay a debt that felt immeasurable. The apartment was even smaller than Arthur had imagined, yet it didn't feel constricting. It felt lived in, a space where every object had a story. Hand-carved wooden animals sat on a shelf next to a stack of library books. Children's drawings, vibrant and chaotic, were taped to the refrigerator door. In a corner stood a workbench, a testament to Leo's trade, with tools hanging neatly on a pegboard and the sweet, sharp scent of pine in the air. It was the antithesis of his own home, which was a vast collection of priceless, meaningless things. Here, everything seemed to have a profound meaning. "Can I offer you a coffee?" Or, "We just made cookies?" Leo said, gesturing towards the small kitchen nook where a plate of still warm chocolate chip cookies sat on the counter. The offer was so simple, so normal, it almost brought Arthur to tears. The last time someone had offered him a homemade cookie was a lifetime ago. "A coffee would be wonderful. Thank you," Arthur managed to say, his voice thick. As Leo moved to the kitchen, the 2 boys, Finn and Sam, continued to stare at him. Finn, the bolder of the 2, stepped forward. "My dad's a carpenter," he announced with pride. "He can make anything. He made our beds." "I can see that," Arthur said, his gaze falling on the sturdy wooden furniture. "He's very talented." Sam remained a few feet behind his brother, silent, clutching his little red car. He watched Arthur with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply compelling. Arthur felt that same strange pull, that flicker of an echo in the deep well of his memory. He forced a smile, trying to appear non-threatening. "That's a very special car you have there," he said gently. Sam clutched it tighter, his expression unreadable. Leo returned with 2 mugs of steaming coffee, handing one to Arthur. The mug was heavy and ceramic, with a small chip on the rim. It felt real and solid in his hands. "So, Arthur," Leo said, leaning against the counter, taking a sip of his own coffee, "what is it you do?" The question was simple, a normal piece of get-to-know-you conversation. But for Arthur, it was a minefield. He couldn't say, "I own a multi-billion-dollar global corporation." It would shatter the fragile connection he was trying to build. He had prepared for this. "I'm in investments," he said, which was technically true. "But I'm semi-retired, looking for new projects, things with more meaning, you know." It was a vague, sanitized version of his life, but it was the best he could do. Leo nodded, accepting the answer without judgment. "I know what you mean. Sometimes the work that pays the bills isn't the work that feeds the soul." He glanced over at his sons, and a look of such profound love and contentment passed over his face that it took Arthur's breath away. "This," he said, his voice soft, "this is the work that matters." Arthur felt a pang of envy, so sharp and so powerful it almost buckled his knees. This man, with his worn-out clothes and his struggling business, was richer than Arthur could ever hope to be. He had purpose, he had love, he had a home that was overflowing with life. Arthur knew he had to act, to make his offer now, before he lost his nerve. He cleared his throat. "Leo," he began, choosing his words with care. "Your kindness the other day. It affected me deeply. I've been thinking about it ever since. I told you I was looking for projects with meaning. Well, I'd like to invest in you." Leo looked at him, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Invest in me? I don't understand." "I'm a carpenter, not a company." "You're an artist," Arthur countered, gesturing towards the beautifully crafted furniture. "And you're a man of incredible character." "I run a small charitable foundation," he lied, the fabrication coming easily to his lips. "And our mission is to support artisans and craftsmen, people who preserve traditional skills. People like you. We provide grants, help them expand their businesses, take on apprentices. We could give you a grant that would allow you to clear your debts, to buy the best materials, to perhaps even open a proper shop, hire an employee. No strings attached. Just a belief in your work and your character." He held his breath, watching Leo's face. He had tried to frame it as an honor, not charity, a business opportunity rooted in respect for his skill. He saw a flicker of suspicion in Leo's eyes, the natural skepticism of a man who knew that life rarely offered such easy gifts. Leo was silent for a long moment, his gaze searching Arthur's face. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. "Why me?" Arthur had prepared for this question too. "Because," he said, leaning forward, his voice earnest and full of a truth that was deeper than his lies, "in a world that can be very cold, you showed me a warmth I had forgotten existed. My foundation. We don't just invest in businesses, we invest in people. And I can't think of a better person to invest in than you." He saw the suspicion in Leo's eyes slowly fade, replaced by a look of stunned, dawning hope. The idea of being free from the crushing weight of debt, of being able to provide for his boys without the constant, gnawing worry, was a dream so distant he had long since stopped allowing himself to imagine it. I don't know what to say," Leo stammered, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe it." "Believe it," Arthur said, pressing his advantage. "Let me help you. Let my foundation help you. You deserve it." The room was quiet, save for the ticking of a clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The two boys were watching the exchange, sensing the gravity of the moment. Finn looked excited, though he didn't fully understand. Sam, however, was still watching Arthur, his expression thoughtful, his gaze fixed on Arthur's face as if he were trying to solve a complex puzzle. Finally, a slow smile spread across Leo's face, a smile of such pure, unadulterated relief and joy that it lit up the entire room. "Okay," he breathed. Yes, okay. The single word was a capitulation, a leap of faith, and for Arthur, it was a victory more satisfying than any he had ever achieved in the boardroom. He had found a way to help, a way to repay his debt. He felt a sense of rightness, of purpose, that had been absent from his life for 7 long years. He believed he was in control, the benevolent benefactor orchestrating a happy ending for a deserving family. He had no idea that he was not the one in control, that he was merely a pawn in a much larger story, a story whose climax was rapidly approaching, a climax that would be announced by the voice of a small, quiet boy who held the key to his entire past. The arrangements were made with a speed and efficiency that left Leo breathless. Arthur, framing it as the standard procedure for his foundation, insisted on a formal meeting to sign the grant papers. He suggested his office, a neutral territory, he called it, to finalize the details. He extended the invitation to the boys as well, wanting them to be part of this momentous occasion for their family. Leo, still reeling from the sudden miraculous turn his life had taken, readily agreed. The thought of visiting a downtown office building was an adventure for the boys, a glimpse into a world far removed from their own. The day of the meeting, Leo dressed himself and the boys in their Sunday best. For Leo, that meant a clean pair of jeans and a collared shirt that was only slightly frayed. For the boys, it meant sweaters their grandmother had knitted, their hair combed flat with water. As they stood before the towering skyscraper of steel and smoked glass that housed Sterling Investments, they felt like travelers in a foreign land. The lobby was a cavernous expanse of polished black marble and gleaming chrome, a place of hushed tones and quiet, purposeful movement. A silent, unsmiling security guard directed them to the express elevator, which whisked them upwards with a stomach-lurching speed that made Finn gasp with delight, and Sam press closer to Leo's side. The elevator doors opened directly into the reception area of Arthur's personal office suite, and the contrast with their own world could not have been more stark. The floors were covered in a rug so thick it swallowed the sound of their footsteps. The walls were adorned with abstract art that pulsed with color and energy. Through a floor-to-ceiling window that stretched the entire length of the room, the city was laid out below them like a map, a breathtaking panorama of power and influence. A woman with a serene smile and a sleek, elegant dress greeted them and led them towards a set of imposing double doors. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," she said, her voice a soft, melodic chime. She opened the doors, and they stepped into Arthur's private office. The room was even more impressive than the reception area. It was vast and minimalist, dominated by a massive desk that looked like it was carved from a single piece of dark, exotic wood. But it wasn't the desk or the expensive furniture that drew the eye. It was the wall behind the desk. On that wall, in a place of singular prominence, hung the portrait, the large, sun-drenched painting of Arthur's lost family. There was Amelia, her head thrown back in laughter. There was William, with his confident, mischievous grin. And there was little Thomas, his expression serious and watchful, clutching his bright red toy convertible. Arthur rose from behind his desk as they entered, a warm, welcoming smile on his face. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, the uniform of his real life, but his expression was open and kind. "Leo, boys, I'm so glad you could make it," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. Leo was momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the wealth on display. He had known his benefactor was successful, but this was a level of opulence he couldn't have imagined. It made him feel small, out of place. He tightened his grip on his son's hands, a subconscious gesture of grounding himself in what was real and true in his life. Finn was equally awestruck, his eyes wide as he took in the incredible view from the window. "Wow," he breathed. "You can see the whole world from here." Arthur chuckled. "It does feel that way sometimes." He came around the desk, the grant papers held in his hand, his demeanor friendly and reassuring, designed to put Leo at ease. He was focused entirely on Leo, on finalizing this act of benevolent patronage, on closing this chapter and rebalancing the scales of kindness. He was not looking at Sam. Sam had stopped just inside the doorway. He hadn't noticed the view, or the desk, or the expensive art. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the portrait on the wall. He let go of Leo's hand and took a half-step forward, his gaze locked on the image of the two little boys in the field of wildflowers. His brow furrowed in concentration, his lips parted slightly. A flicker of recognition, of deep, buried memory, was fighting its way to the surface. He saw the boy with the mischievous grin. He saw the other boy, the serious one, the one clutching a toy car that was the mirror image of the one he held in his own hand at that very moment. A connection was made, a circuit completed deep within the hidden pathways of his mind. The fog that had shrouded his earliest memories began to part, ripped asunder by the powerful, undeniable truth of the image before him. The face of the other boy in the painting was not just a face, it was the face he had seen in his own dreams, the face of a playmate, a companion, a brother. The silence in the room was broken by a single, sharp intake of breath. It was Sam. He raised a trembling hand, his finger pointing directly at the portrait. His voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a cry, a shout that rang through the cavernous office with the force of a thunderclap, a sound of pure, unadulterated, world-shattering revelation. "Daddy!" he screamed, his voice choked with a mix of confusion and certainty, his eyes still locked on the painting. "Daddy, that's my brother." The four words hung in the air, sharp and clear and resonant, shattering the opulent silence of the office. For a single, eternal moment, the world stopped turning. Leo froze, his hand still outstretched from where Sam had pulled away, his face a mask of utter confusion. He looked from his son's trembling, pointing finger to the portrait on the wall, and then back again, trying to make sense of the impossible declaration. He saw two boys in the painting, strangers in a sunlit field. What did Sam mean? Finn, startled by his brother's outburst, looked from Sam to the painting, his young face clouded with incomprehension. He saw a picture, nothing more. He tugged on his father's sleeve. "What's he talking about, Dad?" he whispered, his voice small in the sudden heavy silence. But Arthur didn't hear him. Arthur hadn't moved. He stood, rooted to the spot, the grant papers held loosely in his hand. The boy's scream had struck him with the physical force of a blow, knocking the air from his lungs, stopping the beat of his heart. "Daddy, that's my brother." The words echoed in his head, over and over, a relentless, deafening drumbeat against the inside of his skull. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, as if moving through deep water, his gaze shifting from Sam's frantic, insistent face to the portrait that had been the altar of his grief for 7 long years. He looked at the face of William, his lost, laughing boy, the one he had mourned, the one he had buried in his heart, the boy Sam was pointing at, his brother. The logic was simple, instantaneous, and absolutely cataclysmic. If William was his brother, his mind, a machine trained for complex calculations and ruthless logic, made the connection in a nanosecond, a flash of horrifying, brilliant, impossible light. He looked back at Sam. He saw him now, truly saw him, not as the kind child of a struggling carpenter, but as a ghost from his own past. He saw the shape of his eyes, so like Amelia's. He saw the serious, watchful expression that was a perfect mirror of the boy in the photograph. He saw the way he stood, his small shoulders squared, a stance he recognized with a jolt that was both agonizing and ecstatic. And the car, the goddamned car. The battered red convertible that Sam clutched in his hand was not just similar to the one in the painting. It was the same small chip on the fender, the same slightly askew headlight. It was the toy he had given his son, Thomas, for his 4th birthday, a month before the accident. The fog in his own mind cleared. The unsettling familiarity, the strange sense of connection he had felt since the moment he first laid eyes on the boy, it all crashed down on him with the force of a tidal wave. This was not Sam Vance, the orphan. This was Thomas Sterling, his son, his lost son. The son he believed was dead, the son whose absence had been a gaping, festering wound in his soul for 7 years, was standing right here, in his office, brought to him by a miracle disguised as a simple act of kindness. The strength went out of his legs. The meticulously constructed world he had built, the fortress of wealth and cynicism and grief, crumbled to dust in an instant. The years of hollow, empty survival, of numb, pointless existence, of silent, solitary mourning, they all came rushing back, not as a dull ache, but as a sharp, overwhelming, unbearable torrent of feeling. A sound escaped his lips, a strangled, guttural sob that was ripped from the very core of his being. The grant papers slipped from his nerveless fingers and scattered across the thick, expensive rug, the meaningless ink on the page, a stark testament to his own profound blindness. His knees buckled. He collapsed, not onto a chair, not onto his desk, but onto the floor. A broken, weeping heap of a man, his body convulsing with the force of 7 years of unshed tears. He buried his face in his hands, the sound of his own weeping loud and raw and ugly in the stunned silence of the room. The billionaire froze, and then he collapsed in tears. The proud, powerful magnate undone by a child's cry, his heart shattered and reborn in the same breathtaking moment. The mystery of his past had not just been solved, it had been returned to him, alive and breathing and whole, and the sheer impossible joy of it was more than his broken heart could bear. The sight of the powerful, immaculately dressed man collapsing into a raw, weeping heap on the floor sent a shockwave through the room. Leo reacted instantly, his paternal instincts overriding his confusion and awe. He rushed forward, kneeling beside Arthur, his hand hovering uncertainly over the man's shaking shoulders. "Arthur? Mr. Sterling? What is it? Are you ill?" he asked, his voice a mixture of alarm and concern. Finn, terrified by the sudden violent display of adult grief, burst into tears and clung to his father's leg. But Sam remained still, his finger still pointing, his gaze still fixed on the portrait, his face a canvas of dawning realization and deep, gut-wrenching sorrow. The name, William. He remembered the name now. It was a fragment of a song, a whispered bedtime story, a shout across a sunny field. "William," he whispered, the name feeling both strange and familiar on his tongue. Arthur heard the whisper through the storm of his own sobs. He looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes red and raw. He looked at the boy, his son, his Thomas, and saw the flicker of returning memory in his eyes. He reached out a trembling hand, not towards Leo, but towards Sam. "Thomas?" He choked out, the name a prayer he hadn't dared to speak aloud in 7 years. "Is that you, Thomas?" Sam's eyes shifted from the portrait to Arthur's tear-stained face. He saw not a stranger, not a benefactor, but a man in profound pain, a pain that resonated with a deep, hidden ache in his own small heart. The name Thomas echoed in the empty chambers of his memory, unlocking a door that had been sealed shut by trauma. He took a hesitant step towards the weeping man on the floor, the red car held out in front of him like an offering, a key. Leo watched the scene unfold, his mind struggling to assemble the impossible pieces of the puzzle. The portrait, the name William, Arthur's collapse, the name Thomas, the identical toy car. The truth, as incredible and as stunning as it was, began to dawn on him, a slow, brilliant sunrise of understanding. This wasn't just a business meeting. This wasn't just about a grant. This was something far deeper, a story of loss and reunion that he had stumbled into by sheer chance, by an act as simple as offering a coat to a shivering stranger. His heart went out to this broken man, and to the small, confused boy who was at the center of this emotional maelstrom. The resolution that followed was swift, driven by the raw, undeniable power of the truth. DNA tests were rushed, a mere formality to confirm what everyone in that room already knew in their hearts. The boy known as Sam Vance was, without a shadow of a doubt, Thomas Sterling, the son Arthur had thought he had lost forever. The story, pieced together from fractured memories and old case files, was both tragic and miraculous. In the chaos of the car accident, the 4-year-old Thomas, suffering from shock and a head injury, had wandered away from the scene. He was found hours later by a truck driver, miles down the highway, catatonic and unable to speak his own name. With no identification and his memory wiped clean by the trauma, he was a ghost, a John Doe child who was absorbed into the vast, overburdened foster care system. He had drifted from one temporary home to another, his past erased, his only link to his former life the small red toy car he refused to let go of, until a kind, struggling carpenter had seen a lonely little boy and decided to give him a home, a brother, and a new name. The revelation transformed everything. The cold, sterile mansion that had been Arthur's prison of grief was suddenly thrown open. He wanted to shower his son with every luxury, to make up for the 7 lost years, to wrap him in a cocoon of wealth and privilege. But when he looked at his son, he saw something he hadn't fully appreciated before. He saw the profound, unshakable bond between Thomas and Finn, and the deep, abiding love the boy had for Leo, the man who had been his father in every way that truly mattered. He saw that Leo had not just given his son shelter, he had given him a family. He had healed him. He had taught him to laugh again, to trust again, to love again. To rip Thomas away from that, to sever that sacred bond, would be to inflict a new kind of trauma, a new and terrible loss. Arthur Sterling, the man who had been hollowed out by grief, had been reborn. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a profound, humbling gratitude. His heart, which he thought had been broken beyond repair, was now overflowing. He looked at Leo, the humble carpenter who had saved his son and, in doing so, had saved him, and he knew what he had to do. He did not take Thomas away. Instead, he opened his arms and his life and welcomed Leo and Finn into his world. A new, unconventional family was forged in the crucible of tragedy and miracles. They decided that the boy would be known as Thomas, but that he would always be Sam to his brother. He now had 2 fathers, one who had given him life, and one who had taught him how to live it. The sterile mansion was transformed. The silence was replaced by the chaotic, joyful sounds of children's laughter. The velvet curtains were thrown open, letting the sunlight stream in. Finn and Thomas now had a backyard the size of a park, a swimming pool, and every toy they could ever imagine. The long, polished mahogany dining table was now filled with life, the sight of noisy family dinners where stories were shared and bonds were strengthened. Arthur learned to laugh again, a deep, genuine laugh that came from a place of pure joy. Leo, though grateful for the security Arthur's wealth provided, insisted on keeping his workshop. He continued to carve his beautiful wooden creations, not for money, but for the love of the craft, teaching his skills to both of his sons. He remained the quiet, steady anchor of their family, a man of simple dignity whose integrity was a lesson to them all. The final scene of their old life, and the first of their new one, was not of grand gestures, but of a quiet, simple moment. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the four of them were in the vast, sun-drenched garden of the mansion. Arthur was pushing Thomas on a swing, his face alight with a happiness he never thought he would feel again. A few feet away, Leo and Finn were on their hands and knees in the grass, racing the little red toy car against Finn's brightly painted wooden bird. The two symbolic objects, one from a past of loss, one from a present of hope, were now joined together in a simple game, a perfect metaphor for their blended, healed family. The man who had everything and the man who had nothing had discovered that they both had exactly what they needed, a truth brought to them by the love of two little boys who had always known, in their hearts, that they were brothers.